Howdy, y'all. There we go. Okay, just a little bit. We had teachers that always would, guess what we're doing today? So we had teachers that would always have chapel in the morning before school started, and in the chapel they'd say, "Oh, good morning," and then no one says anything because we're all tired. He goes, "Well, I didn't hear you. Let me hear it again." It always bothered me beyond all. I was like, please, just leave us alone. So I gave you a little taste of that. All right, this morning we're done with the we're done with the Didache, which y'all were thrilled about learning. I could see it on your faces. You were enthralled with a non-biblical book discussion. We talked about the book of Jude. That is in the Bible, believe it or not. Short little book. And he quotes the book of 1st Enoch within there. Also, Peter does in the book of 2nd Peter. And so we read a section of 1st Enoch, and I'm sure y'all were enthusiastic about that. Some of you were anyway. And so we've moved on from that kind of stuff. That's textual criticism. If you need a title for what that is, you're looking critically at a text either of Scripture or Scripture adjacent when it comes to the Didache from the 2nd century and the book of 1st Enoch from the Apocrypha of the Old Testament. And so we're moving on to the Bible. Can you believe it? In a Bible class? How about that? So here's my conundrum. I sent a survey out, a questionnaire for you guys to answer, to fill out to see what you wanted to talk about. And a couple of them were just so precise. What is the mark of the beast? What's the number 666 mean? What about those microchips that are being implanted in our arms, which is what Revelation talks about? That's a bit too on the nose. And so for those that asked those questions, I sent out articles to be able to read through them. And then if you still have questions about those things, let me know. We'll talk about it. So instead, what we're going to do for a couple of weeks is talk about the life of Joseph. Now, in preparing for this particular class, I went through his life again. I've preached his life before. I've talked about his life a lot. I still think he's one of my favorite people of the Bible because his character is so different than the first three patriarchs talked about in Scripture. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, those guys have lives that are just wild. I love the fact that we see their humanity and that they made very obvious mistakes and kind of course corrected throughout their life. For example, Abraham, when he was called, he didn't immediately go out to the land of Canaan, but he didn't know it was called that at that time. Instead, he kind of just waited in Haran, and then eventually he went with some family members and some servants and so on. And then he went to a city, and he was afraid that his wife was going to be taken by the king, so he lies about their relationship and says, that's my sister. Kind of half true, if you know the genealogies there. And then he goes to a different city, and he's afraid the king is going to take his wife, so he lies again, so didn't learn his lesson. And then we see him trying to help God's plan along by having Ishmael as his firstborn son, which is not the child of promise. So all I'm trying to say is when you look at Abraham, Isaac, especially Jacob, they've got messy lives. They're very human. But of the ancient biblical individuals that are someone a little bit special, Jacob is one of those that I think is a great example. I think there is probably at least one negative drawback about the life or the character of Joseph, if I can be critical of him for a moment. And it could be naivety. It could be the fact that he's just so naive. He is 17 years old when we meet him, and he might have a little bit of an ego or pride, and it's probably because of his father's relationship with him. And so we'll uncover that as we go through. But the rest of the character of Joseph is someone that is just so remarkable, especially in the book of Genesis. So let's go ahead and turn there. We're going to go to Genesis 37, picking up here in verse 1. Let's go ahead and transition to the Apple TV if we can. That's a cue. There we are. Can you read that? It's okay? That's as big as I can make it, all right? That's all I got for you. I literally can't make it any larger to where I have to work with that. If you can't read that, there's a thing called a Bible, which you may own. You could turn there if you were so inclined, or you have a phone or an iPad or whatever you got. The point of putting it up here is twofold. First of all, I like to be able to have a visual to go along with me just reading up here. I've been to classes before where there's no visual at all. It's just someone reading. And to me, you lose me after about 3 minutes of some guy reading the text. So I like to have it up there so you know what I'm reading. You can see the translation there, the ESV. Also, for those that are watching on the stream, if you've ever watched a stream before on your phone, for example, it's hard to multitask in an iPhone or any kind of phone, really. So you have the stream up, and if you don't know where they are, you have a Bible near you, you want to use your phone app, you kind of go back and forth. So this is in the corner of the stream as well. So it's kind of twofold to have something up there so you know where we are. So, okay. Genesis 37. Before we get into the actual bulk of the text here, do we have any thoughts, questions, comments you guys want to do before we get into it? Just want to give you the platform if you want it, just for a minute. Okay. Genesis 37. Let's see, can somebody read for me verses 1 through 3?
Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with sons Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors.
All right, so he's kind of identified here in verse 3 as the baby of the family. He's not technically the youngest son of Jacob, but he is one that when he has him, obviously he shows that love towards him in a different way than the others. He's called the son of his old age, so maybe he was getting advanced in years, and definitely he was. He made him a robe of many colors. This is the Technicolor robe, is it not? It's a little bit before my time, so you guys have to tell me if I'm wrong about that or not. But so here's the deal with this. The Hebrew is unclear. And so he made him a robe of many colors. If you have a different translation or a footnote, it might say something like he had sleeves, which is kind of funny to me that was the highlight of this robe that he wore. It had sleeves. Like, oh, wow, sleeves. You must love this boy a lot to make him a garment with sleeves on. But whatever the case, that made him stand out because it was a gift from Jacob, or Israel, to Joseph that the other brothers didn't get. And so that definitely is going to be a problem. We'll see that. If you look at Genesis 36, right before this passage which we just read, you've got a bunch of individuals and genealogies mentioned. I guess the idea of flowing into this is the narration, the narrative actually picks up with describing how Jacob is an older man. They are now shepherds, and they're pasturing in this particular area. Their agrarian culture has kind of picked up steam. And then you've got Jacob, or Israel, and all his sons working with him. So if you remember, we have Abram, who was originally called, and you have Sarai, if you want to use the English version of that. And then they, as old people, had a promised child given unto them, Isaac. And we have Abraham, Isaac, and then, of course, we have Jacob. Jacob was the second born. Esau was technically first. And then if you know the life of Jacob, you'll understand how Jacob is now the transferred one to the promise, the seed line. Okay, so verses, 4 through verse 11, somebody.
Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheep arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheep gathered around it and bowed down to my sheep." His brothers said to him, Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, and his father kept saying in mind.
Okay, so this is the naive portion I was talking about at the intro. If you have a dream like this where your brothers are going to be bowing down to you, and you know there's some animosity, some friction already in that relationship, is it a good idea to tell your brothers, "Hey, I had a dream that you were all bowing down to me"? Keep that on the inside, right? You don't have the Melissa filter, my wife's voice in my mind constantly. I'm going to say something, and I run it through the Melissa filter. I say, "Hey, if I said it just to her, would the reaction be, 'Yeah, you should say that'? Or is it, 'Alan'? The Alan should have kicked in here for him." Keep that on the inside, right? Now, if you know the life of Joseph already, which is a good guess that you might, you'll recognize that he has an ability here, and when he's interpreting dreams. He has dreams and visions come to him all the time in his life, it seems, and they are significant. And so I believe the proper way to understand this is he, as a 17-year-old kid, has had this dream. He interprets the dream in a proper way to understand what's being said. And ironically, it's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. It's kind of like, I had a dream that you were all bowing down to me. And if he didn't tell his brothers wouldn't do what they're about to do in the next set piece. He wouldn't be sold as a slave. He wouldn't end up in Egypt. He wouldn't be betrayed by Potiphar's wife. He wouldn't be put in jail. He wouldn't then be able to interpret Pharaoh's dream and prepare for the famine and then rule over his brothers as second in command in Egypt, right? So if he didn't tell them, then I'd imagine that none of this would have taken place the way it's supposed to. So maybe it was good that he told his brothers in the long run, but maybe not in the short run, right? So that naive, "Hey, here's this dream I had." I think it's interesting. He's rebuked by his father in verse 10 by Jacob or Israel. Don't talk about that, and we're not going to bow down to you. You're our kid, right? We're not going to be bowing down to you. And then he's kind of keeping it in the back of his mind, which is interesting, that Jacob had transformed his character enough to be able to keep that thought in the back of his mind throughout the rest of his life. Okay, any questions, comments, thoughts so far? Okay, pretty simple, right? It's not the Didache, it's not First Enoch and angels making the Nephilim and all that. It's not nearly as fun, but here it is. Okay, here we go. Verse 12, "Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph," so keep in mind here, Israel is the new name for Jacob. So you have Jacob, he was renamed Israel. Do you remember the history of that? When did that take place? Yeah, so if you wrestle an angel and you almost win, I mean, first of all, that's insane, isn't it? Like, if you see an angel, everyone else in the Bible just drops to their knees, start to worship, they're fearful of their life. Jacob's like, "Yeah, I'll fight him," right? So that's already insane. And then he pins him almost, and the angel has to pop his hip out of socket to make him stop, which is also pretty wild. And he's renamed from Jacob to Israel. So what's Israel mean literally? Some trivia for you, I guess. Anyone know what the name Israel means? I mean, they're called the Israelites for the rest of the time, so I mean, that's probably good to know.
On the edge of my seat.
Edge of your seat.
Edge of my
It's
seat.
not, it's not going to be that dramatic. Prince of God. Prince of God. So governor, ruler, prince of God. So he's going to be now, he's the leader of Israel, and they become a great nation, obviously. So Israel said to Joseph, "Are your brothers not pasturing the flock at Shechem? Behold, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." Now, to me, it's interesting how it's just the way the phraseology in the Hebrew works. But every time that someone's called to go somewhere, to go do something for someone else who's like a father figure, even God himself in that same role, whenever he says, "Hey, where are you?" the response is always, "Here I am," right? I think of Samuel in the book of 1 Samuel, when he is hearing God in the middle of the night. He's talking to the high priest, like, "Did you call me?" He's like, "No, I didn't." So he goes back to bed. He hears the voice again. He goes, "Hey, did you call me?" "No, I didn't." And he goes, "But if it's God, and you're hearing it and I'm not, first of all, it's not a great thing if you're the high priest and God won't talk to you. Secondly, if you hear it again, say, 'Here I am, Lord,' okay? He hears it a third time, 'Here I am, Lord.'" So every time you have this phrase, "Hey, where are you? Here I am." So you have it here. You have it, obviously, with Samuel when he was a boy. And then, of course, you get Isaiah. Isaiah comes before the throne room of God. He says, "I have a mission for someone to go on." Wink, wink, Isaiah. He's like, "Hey, here I am, send me." So that's the kind of motto as we go through here. Okay, verse 14. He said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock. Bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" He said, "I am seeking my brothers. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, because I heard them say, 'Let us go down to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. I wonder if this is a trap. I don't have any evidence for it, but it just seems like the kind of thing these brothers might do. They're supposed to be in one location. They travel down to Dothan, which is a bit more isolated, away from the valley where they were in Shechem. And they happen to tell some random dude, "Hey, we're going down to Dothan. If anyone comes looking for us, that's where we're going to be." So they're in Dothan. Verse 18, they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him, as a good brother would, right? And they said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." So again, they are still thinking about that dream they heard about. They're still upset about it, which I would be too, I imagine. And their plan is to kill him and throw him into one of the pits. So that word in the Hebrew, pits, is the same word kind of like Sheol. So if you'll know that the Bible talks about the idea of when we die, especially in Ecclesiastes, he's pretty negative in that book. When you die, you go into the Sheol, you go into the pit. You're just thrown into the earth, and that's where you are, and that's the end of life. That's Ecclesiastes. That's their plan. But when Reuben heard it, of course, Reuben's well known for what? His delicious sandwich. I mean, obviously, here it is. I got 2 chuckles. I'm proud. Okay. I mean, it's the best, right? Is it German? Yes. And it's a tangent? Okay, we're going back to the text. Verse 21. When Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him in the pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So good guy Reuben here is like, "Listen, I like your plan to kill him and everything, but how about we just throw him in the pit so I can later on go save him and bring him back because, his dad loves him." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe that had sleeves that he wore. So robe of many colors, or because it had sleeves. They took him, threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. They sat down to eat. I mean, can you imagine a weirder picnic than this? Here you are, out there taking care of sheep. You brought some lunch with you. Your brother comes along, the 17-year-old kid who says he's going to rule over you one day. So your plan, take his robe, take his tunic, his cloak, throw him in a pit. There's no water down there. He's just kind of existing down there in this pit. And you just have a meal together around this pit where your brother's lying down in there. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. Who are the Ishmaelites? Those from Ishmael, right? Yeah, so there are people that are not people from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob per se, the patriarchal family, the people that God chose. They're the ones that are kind of out here on the outsides. The Ishmaelites do eventually become what we would kind of say are the people of Canaan. The Philistines are the big ones that come out of this whole seed line there, which is important to know for later. They came from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. So they were trading. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, because he's our brother, our own flesh." Well, you know, if you don't see the irony in that, it's like, well, yeah, we did, take his tunic off of him and throw him in a pit to die, but you know what? Let's not touch him anymore. Let's just go ahead and just sell him, because he is our brother after all. All right, Judah. His brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by. They drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, which, by the way, is not a whole lot. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes, which is the idea of mourning, and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in the blood, and they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
The Midianite traders,
Yeah.
where did they come in?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. Are they the same thing as the
Ishmaelites,
Same thing?
Okay.
same idea.
Well,
Yeah.
the Midianite traders passed by, they drove those up, and they sold them to the Ishmaelites.
Yeah.
So it almost sounds like the Midianites sold them to the Ishmaelites.
I think it's the same caravan, the same group.
Okay,
Unless I'm mistaken.
okay.
Let's Google it.
You can Google it. Hey, if I'm wrong, let me know.
It was a caravan of Midianites and Ishmaelites, possible.
I'm sure.
So Midianite pulled them up out of the pit.
I think so. All right. A Midianite is someone from Midian, the location of Midian. Ishmaelites means who the daddy was, right? So it could be the same thing.
Okay.
It could be. So if I'm wrong, let me know. Dip the robe into the blood and said, "Hey, Dad, we found this. Does this look familiar to you?" As if they don't know already, right? He identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him," which is the assumption. "Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Jacob tore his garments, put on sackcloth, again mourning, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to the pit." Don't miss the irony here. "I shall go down to the pit to my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Okay. So the obvious irony here is the brothers took him and threw him where? In the pit, in Sheol, literally. And so Jacob says, my son is dead, the one I love the most, which you shouldn't have favorites. The one I love the most, I gave him that coat. It had colors and sleeves on it. It was the best coat in the world. And now, of course, an animal has devoured him. I'm going to go down to my grave, to the pit, to Sheol, to be with my son, which, of course, is just so thick. Imagine being guilty, being one of the brothers who knows what you actually did. He's not dead as far as they know. They just sold him to slavers. And then they're here trying to comfort their father who is mourning the death of his most beloved son, Joseph. Okay, questions, comments? All right, that's the introduction. So imagine you are in the sandals of Joseph for a minute. You're a 17-year-old kid. Your dad loves you, which is great. Your brothers hate you, not great. You have these dreams that you have your brothers and the sun, the moon, the stars all bowing down to worship you because you must be special. And you know you're special because your dad loves you so much, gives you a coat, it has colors, it has sleeves, it's the best coat in the world, right? And that day that would have been, what's a brand that's popular? I don't know. Gucci? Is that still popular? I have no idea. Members only? I'm not sure that's quite the same class. Maybe one step above members only. All right. So he's wearing this great coat. His brothers hate him, though. They are going to kill him, which is not great. Instead, they just sell him as a slave. Again, not great, but at least you're alive. And we're going to skip over this next section because if you know the story, it gets a little crazy there for a minute, All right, here we go. Chapter 39. If you don't know Judah and Tamar, by the way, it's an interesting read, but it does not line up with Joseph's life at all, so we're going to skip that for now. Okay. Here is really where it kicks in to show us something a little bit deeper about the character of Joseph. If you just had that first section of him and his brothers and being sold as a slave, you don't have a lot of information about the nature of who Joseph really is, besides being someone who's 17 and his dad loves him, he's got a coat, he's having these wild dreams, and his brothers hate him for it, right? So that's not a whole lot of detail. This is where it really kicks in. Chapter 39 of Genesis, verse 1. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. So these little moments were given a small glimpse into what's happening beyond the veil of this physical life. It's not often, especially with Joseph, that you get to kind of see God's reaction to all of this. This is just a narrative, a story, a telling of the life of Joseph. So when God shows up, which is kind of rare in his life, it's interesting to kind of note that. So the first one, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. So whether or not this is the author being reflective on God's actual attention being paid to Joseph's life, or it's kind of a rereading of the fact of, well, the Lord must have been with him because he was doing these things, doesn't really matter. The fact is, what he did was successful, was full of success in Potiphar's household. Does that make sense? So the author here could just be saying, well, he was blessed because things went well, therefore the Lord must have been with him, or it's that little glimpse I was talking about before. Okay, verse 3. His master, Potiphar, saw that the Lord was with him, that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. So you buy a slave one day at the market, as you do back in this day, and you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what kind of person this guy is. But you buy this guy, give him responsibility in one area, that goes really, really well. And so you promote him, and now he's the manager of your entire household. That's kind of how he rose the ranks here. We're not really given a time frame, but I imagine it would be less than a year that he's promoted to this area of being in charge. Verse 5, from that time he made him overseer in his house over all that he had, and the Lord blessed the Egyptian house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. Now, from verse 5, you might make a point, at least I want to make a point here. Why was Potiphar's household being blessed? Because of Joseph. Who was blessing the Egyptian household for Potiphar? God was. Was he doing it because of how great Potiphar was? No. Joseph, in this position, seemed to be making the best out of it that he possibly could have. He could have been someone that was lamenting over not being with his family, his brothers betraying him and selling him as a slave. He could have just lied down here and mourned all day, but it seems like even despite the negative circumstance he finds himself in, he does the best that he can. And because of that, the Lord blesses him and blesses even Potiphar's household for his sake. I guess the point I'm trying to make is sometimes in life, we as Christians can have a very positive impact even in our workplace. It's not always going to be a very positive situation that we're placed in, but we can be a blessing to the organization that we're involved with. The idea of being an asset to your employer is a positive thing in Scripture. It was used with the slave and the master dichotomy in Ephesians, for example. The same thing applies for us when we are working on giving our time over to our employer. We can be a blessing to them because of the Lord's impact on us. So, for what it's worth, there you go. Verse 6. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Which is good. He's got someone responsible who's managing his household. Being captain of the guard for Pharaoh must have been a very prominent and wealthy position. So now his concerns are just, okay, where's the next meal coming from? That's basically it. And then we have an aside. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, which, by the way, is not that uncommon in Scripture. I think it's interesting that we have any kind of comments about his appearance at all. There's only a couple of people that are introduced in this kind of way. You have Joseph here. You have Abigail when you have David, for example, going up to kill all the men in Nabal's household. Abigail, Nabal's wife, comes and presents herself before David and says, please, my husband is an idiot, literally, and he said the wrong things and he offended you. Please don't kill everyone. Here is some food. I'm so sorry. And because Abigail, a beautiful girl, comes out, or a woman comes out and presents this apology note and gifts to David, David says, the Lord sent you, because believe me, I had just strapped on my sword. We're going to kill everyone in that town because of the offense that Nabal, your husband, caused me. If the Lord didn't send you to me, then you wouldn't have any more men in that town, which is David, by the way, just one of those moments where he's out there, he finds these guys. This is totally an aside away from the life of Joseph. He is out there on the run. He finds some guys. He takes care of them. He gives them food, gives them water, keeps them safe, sends them back to Nabal, who their master was, and then says, Nabal, hey, we took care of your guys for you. We're just traveling through. Do you have any food? Do you have any water? Can we stay here for a couple days? We're just going to be passing through. He says, I don't know who you are. Get out of here. He goes, okay. So David straps on his sword. And do you recall from that narrative in Samuel what sword he happened to have? Goliath's sword. I mean, come on. This is one of those moments. I mean, I'm like a 13-year-old boy reading that story. I'm like, what? He had Goliath's sword. He strapped it on. He's going to kill everybody. And then Abigail shows up and saves the day because he was going to go in there and just slaughter people. David's like, hey, I'm so thankful for you. Because of your kindness, because you came out here, everyone gets to live. Thank the Lord that you were sent. Okay. So Abigail's beautiful. A couple of times when you have people mention about how handsome they are, King Saul immediately comes to mind. I mean, King Saul he had the look of a politician king of Israel. He was literally head and shoulders taller than everybody else around him. He stood out. He was a good-looking guy, came from a good stock. He was a leader. Problem was his relationship with God wasn't that great. He had a little bit of an ego about him, right? So Joseph, going back to our text, was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." He refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house. He has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" All right. This is it. This is the moment that we are given a glimpse into the heart and the mind of Joseph. And what we find is very uncommon back then. It's even very uncommon today. He is betrayed by his own family members. He is sold as a slave. He does the best with what he has to work with. He is being blessed by God. He knows it. He is taking care of his responsibilities. He is doing okay in the circumstances in which he finds himself. He's given an opportunity of temptation here by Potiphar's wife. Powerful, influential, wealthy, and she is attracted to him physically. She presents an opportunity for sexual temptation before him, and what is his reaction? What are you talking about? Your husband put me in charge of all that he has. He's given me a great responsibility. He's kept nothing back from my charge except for you because you're married to the guy. How could I do that to him? And then he concludes the thought with this final phrase: how can I do this great wickedness? And what? Sin against God. I mean, does that stand out as something special to you?
Yes.
Me having my profession, I'm privy to a lot of things that go on. And the amount of times that I have encountered a good Christian man being given this same exact temptation and failing, it's a sad thing. To look at a hero of the book of Genesis like Joseph, and to know that despite all the negative things that happened to him in his life, he was still saying, listen, no, I've got my responsibilities. Your husband has blessed me. I've been a blessing to him. I can't sin against your husband. I can't sin against my God by going in this direction. That's a huge, huge characteristic of what it shows us about what Joseph knew about God. This was before the law of Moses. The idea of do not commit adultery, don't lust after your neighbor's wife, wasn't really a thing yet. But the patriarchs knew what the law of God was, and they passed it down from father to son, to son, to son, to son. Joseph knew about God, and no doubt he learned it from Prince of God who wrestled an angel and almost won. Of all the people, that's what he walked away with. And I love that because it shows us that despite our flaws, despite our humanity, how frail and how fallible we are, there's still this standard that God expects of his people. Okay, any questions or thoughts about that?
There are times for a man to run away.
That's true. That's true. Okay, we're going to pick up here. Lord willing, creek don't rise. Verse 10. Next week, we'll continue on to see how Joseph continually refuses this advancement. And it does not go well for him. However, I would give you this thought to close. If he did give it into temptation, and he lay with his master's wife, and the master found out about it, what would be the penalty? Death. Yeah, death. That's not a great thing to face here. When you're already betrayed by your own family members, you're now a slave over the captain of the guard of Pharaoh's army. Then you get caught with that. That's not a great risk. But we'll pause here in verse 10, pick it up next week, Lord willing. All right. Thank you guys for your attention this morning. We will close out and we'll begin again in about 16 minutes for worship.